Your first Formula One race is supposed to be the start of something special, but for some drivers, it's a weekend that haunts the rest of their career. Today, we're looking at the debuts where everything went horribly wrong. And you know we've got to start off by looking at our favourite crash barrier enthusiast, Lance Stroll, because his F1 debut was one to remember, just for all the wrong reasons. Now Lance didn't exactly have a standard route into Formula One, because his dad has money, and lots of it. He was basically fast-tracked through the junior categories with unlimited funding. And Formula 2? Well, who needs that when your dad is a billionaire? So Lance skipped F2 entirely, jumping straight from Formula 3 into Formula 1. In 2017, he joined the Williams team, who were desperate to sign him. I mean, desperate to pocket the reported $80 million his dad paid them for his son to join the team. Anyways, the Williams that year was a solid midfield car, and certainly more than capable of fighting for points. But before Stroll even stepped foot on track, the pressure was immense. He wasn't just a rookie, he was also a pay driver, with everyone questioning if he even deserved to be in the sport. And that meant the scrutiny on his debut was only more intense. But he didn't exactly make his first weekend in Melbourne hard to criticize when he went and did this in FP3. We could chalk this up to a simple rookie error, but this wasn't even his first crash in the Williams, as just a few weeks prior he both spun out and crashed heavily during the Barcelona pre-season testing. It felt like running off track was starting to become a theme for the young Canadian, so when qualifying in Melbourne rolled around, I think everybody half expected him to end up in the barriers at turn 1. But somehow he defied all the odds and actually kept his car out of the wall. Well, that might have just been because he was going too slow to actually crash. He struggled to hook a lap together at all, and it was obvious he was fighting with the car. And so, he qualified 19th, almost 5 seconds off pole and nearly 3 seconds behind his teammate Felipe Massa, who qualified 7th. Even for a rookie, that gap is utterly insane. So, when the cars lined up on Sunday, the expectations for Lance's race couldn't have been lower. I mean, I think his race would have been called a success if he managed to finish less than 5 laps behind the leader. But as the lights went out, Lance instead decided to send the fear of God into his fellow drivers.
He looked to be arriving way too quickly into that turn 1, locking up, but avoided people.
That's a horrible flat spot on his right front though.
He was literally meters away from wiping out half of the grid after misjudging that braking zone, and ended up flat spotting his front right tyre in the process. If we're being generous, he did gain a few positions from that move, but he lost them anyway, since he had to pit twice during the race thanks to the flat spot. The rest of his race was pretty dismal, with his best lap time well over a second off his teammate's pace. And just to add to the misery, the Canadian's car decided to call it quits on lap 44 when the brakes failed. In all fairness, that last one wasn't Lance's fault, but it only adds to the embarrassment. I mean, how embarrassed would you feel if your dad paid millions to buy your way into the sport, and then have a debut weekend like that? That got to hurt. And while that was rough, a certain Russian pay driver took the embarrassment to the extreme in 2021. But we'll get onto him a little later. For now, we're moving on to a debut that features one of the most bone-chilling F1 crashes I've ever witnessed. Jos Verstappen. These days he's best known for being Max's dad. But back in the early 90s, he was an almost completely unknown driver with just 2 years of single-seater racing experience. After impressing during a test outing for the Footwork Arrows team, he was signed as a test driver for the Benetton F1 team in 1994. But unbeknownst to Jos, he wouldn't only test F1 cars that year, but he'd end up racing them. Because in a twist of fate, the planned Benetton driver JJ Leto broke his vertebrae in a crash during pre-season practice, forcing the team to call up their test driver Jos at the very last minute. And, as if that wasn't stressful enough, it wasn't a backmarket team he was joining. Oh no, because Benetton that year were on top form, and his teammate, well, that only happened to be the legendary Michael Schumacher. If you were trying to design the most intense conditions for a rookie debut, that pretty much ticks every box. But when the first round at Interlagos came around, Jos didn't look completely dreadful. Sure, he was twitchy and couldn't control the car like Schumacher, but he still qualified 9th. Not exactly terrible considering he had all the odds stacked against him. And on race day, Verstappen actually looked like he might just make it through the weekend. He was running in 9th and by lap 34 seemed to be getting into the rhythm of things. He was rapidly gaining on the Jordan of Eddie Irvine up ahead, but in a split second, everything went horrifyingly wrong.
Oh dear me, that is an appalling moment. Eddie Irvine pulling out to try and pass. He clipped Jos Verstappen, who was on his left-hand side.
That was just gut-wrenching to watch. If you slow the footage down, you can literally see the tyre of Jos's Benetton slam into the head of Martin Brundle in the McLaren ahead. But I have to make one thing clear. This infamous debut was by no means Jos's fault. Irvine was instead to blame, as he forced Jos wide while trying to overtake a lap car, completely unaware that the Benetton had pulled alongside him, triggering that gut-wrenching crash. A crash so bad, Irvine earned a 3-race ban for the incident. Having a crash like that on debut is utterly insane, and honestly, I don't know how Martin Brundle walked away from that without a scratch. A few inches either way, and that could have been a far darker story. For years, Formula One has sold the same idea, that each year, the rookies arrive more prepared than ever. They have countless hours in the simulator, multiple free practice outings, and a junior career which usually started from the moment they could walk. But the 2025 Australian Grand Prix showed us that no matter how prepared a rookie is, when rain hits the track, it's a whole different ballgame. And the first victim of a soggy Melbourne track was Isaac Hadjar, and this one was pretty painful to watch. After a solid qualifying session, he was starting in 11th on Sunday, but unfortunately for Hadjar, he didn't even make it to the start line before his weekend was cut short.
Off already. No way, Isaac Hadjar. We were talking about the rookies, and he has gone into the wall.
And just like that, it was over. You could practically feel how distraught the young rookie was as he stood there, bawling his eyes out next to his wrecked car. And my heart really felt for him. And on his way back to the garage, he had that quiet moment where Anthony Hamilton stepped in and reminded everyone just how human these kids still are. What a class act. But Melbourne wasn't done there. Oh no. Because next up was Jack Doohan, who already had mounting pressure on his shoulders. Even before the season began, rumours had been circulating that Doohan was going to be replaced by the Alpine reserve driver, Franco Colapinto. So heading into Melbourne, I can only imagine just how much Doohan wanted to prove himself. And the fact that this was his home race only added to that pressure. But as the very first lap got underway, it wasn't long before the safety car was out once again.
The home hero brings out the safety car. Most importantly, he's okay, but we've lost 2 of the full season rookies by turn 5.
Another painful DNF. Those white lines really are like ice in the wet, and on lap 46, the Brazilian rookie Gabriel Bortoleto found that out the hard way.
And off the road we go with Gabriel Bortoleto, the rookie struggling in the wet again.
3 debuts, 3 DNFs. That really was the worst possible way to start the season. You've just got to put yourself in their shoes. Their entire life had led to this moment, all of the sacrifices from their parents, all of the dedication, and for it all to be ended in a split second. That's just brutal. But if it was any consolation, even experienced drivers on the grid weren't exactly having the best time on track.
Carlos Sainz has found the wall. Into the wall we go. Fernando Alonso hits the barriers.
But this next debut, well, it was painful to watch for an entirely different reason. The name Yuji Ide probably doesn't ring any bells, but trust me, this man is one of the most infamous drivers in F1 history, and his debut, well, that was certainly something special. The year was 2006, and the newly formed Super Aguri team was set to join the grid. Led by former driver Aguri Suzuki and backed by Honda, the team were keen to showcase Japanese talent within their ranks and went about hiring 2 Japanese drivers. The first of which, Takuma Sato, was an experienced driver with a previous podium finish. But the second, well, that's where Yuji Ide fits in. Ide was not really F1 material. In fact, he was far from it. While he had years of experience racing in Formula 3 and other junior categories, his results were middling at best, and certainly not what you'd expect to see on the resume of an F1 driver. Combine that with his only pre-season testing being 27 miles around Barcelona, and Ide was basically in for it from the start. From the very first practice session in Bahrain, Ide looked lost. Not slow in a new driver learning the car way, slow in a way that actively worried other drivers. He was several seconds off his teammates, consistently missed braking points, ran wide under minimal pressure, and spent most of the session making small corrections just to keep the car pointing in the right direction. The bigger issue though, he was unpredictable. Faster cars never knew where he was going to be. He was almost 3 seconds behind his teammates in qualifying, lining up in 21st on race day, only ahead of Raikkonen who hadn't set a time. At that point, the concern wasn't even performance, it was safety. Race day only made things worse, as Ide was already being lapped by the leaders on lap 11, and it was clear he just didn't belong on an F1 track. He struggled to interpret blue flags, struggled to keep his car on track, and struggled even more when it came to putting his car into neutral for his pit stop. I don't think there was anything he didn't struggle with. He was dangerously slow, completely unpredictable, but thankfully, by some miracle, his race ended unceremoniously on lap 34 when his engine gave up. Honestly, I bet the other drivers breathed a massive sigh of relief. But part of me really feels for the guy. He was completely underprepared for this race, and to be frank, he shouldn't have been anywhere near a Formula 1 track. He was clearly a danger to his fellow drivers, and that will be proven true just 3 races later at Imola when he caused this horrifying crash.
Out of it. Oh, there we go.
It's
Down.
Albers. Yeah, Albers, you see rolling the car.
That incident, combined with his erratic driving, lack of pace, and inability to control his car, led to the FIA revoking his super license shortly after that weekend, effectively banning him from the sport. Let me know in the comments if you want a full video on Ide, because he truly was one of a kind. But the next debut is even more infamous, because I don't think there was a single positive that came out of this driver's weekend. Nikita Mazepin. If this name doesn't ring any bells, then you're in for a shock, because this man was one of the most controversial drivers in Formula 1 history, and he wasn't even fast. Like fellow pay driver Lance Stroll, Mazepin had a billionaire father funding his career, although, unlike Stroll, his dad wasn't a Canadian investor, but was instead a powerful Russian oligarch with direct ties to the Kremlin. Obviously, his debut was already marred by his pay driver status, but it's what he did in the months leading up to it that really set the F1 community alight. Just days after his announcement as a Haas driver for 2021, he posted a disgusting video on Instagram involving a woman who he appeared to touch inappropriately. The backlash was immense, and the Russian driver was under immediate fire before he even stepped foot on track, and rightly so. That video was downright revolting, and if you're wondering why he wasn't sacked immediately, well, just take a look at the 2021 Haas car and read out the title sponsor, Uralkali. Yep, if you haven't guessed it, that's his dad's company. Anyways, controversy aside, Mazepin looked utterly dismal during his free practice debut, with multiple spins setting the tone for the weekend, and when qualifying rolled around, the disappointment continued. Last place. Ouch. Now, to be fair, the Haas that year was utterly woeful and was by no means worthy of even scoring points. But if we compare Nikita to his rookie teammate Mick Schumacher, he was still over 8/10 off the pace. That type of deficit is a lifetime in Formula 1. Now, the hope was that he'd get his head down in the race, stay out of trouble, and quietly finish his first Grand Prix, at least getting used to the car a little more. Only that was still too much to ask.
Down towards turn 4 and that's off, and that looks like a Haas, and it could have been Nikita Mazepin in the Haas spearing off into the barriers at turn 3. There's definitely going to be a safety car, I would imagine.
His race ended in literal seconds as he lost control on turn 3. I genuinely don't know how your debut can get much worse than that. But as bad as crashing out on lap 1 looks, it somehow gets even worse, because this next debut holds a record I didn't even know was possible. Hans Heyer. I hadn't heard of him, and I'm sure you haven't either. That's probably because he competed in a single Grand Prix in 1977. Well, technically, I'm not sure if he even competed. You see, Hans wasn't a man with much single-seater racing experience. In fact, I'm not sure he had any. Instead, he came from a background of racing touring cars in his home country of Germany, so the chances of him racing in F1 were basically slim to none, or so you'd think. Fortunately for Hans, newly formed German team by the name of ATS were looking for a local talent to join as a second driver, and given they were strapped for cash, Hans seemed like the only man fit for the job. I mean, who even needs single-seater experience, right? Qualifying painted a bleak picture for the German, because he wasn't just slow, he was actually too slow to even qualify, setting a time over 4.5 seconds off pole. That meant he was out, and his weekend was over, or so everyone thought. On race day, Hans decided to hang around the pits. After all, he was technically on the reserve list, meaning if enough drivers dropped out before the Grand Prix started, he'd be allowed to race. But that call never came. Hans, though, well, he had another trick up his sleeve. Given this was his home Grand Prix, he was more than a little friendly with some of the marshals. And so, when a massive crash on the starting grid occurred mere seconds into the race, Hans made his move. In the confusion, he simply drove out of the pits past the marshals and joined the races. Hans is now racing in a Grand Prix he hadn't even qualified for. For 9 laps, Hans was living the dream. He was actually racing in Formula 1, at his home race no less. But this all came to a rather abrupt end when his gearbox failed on lap 9, and in that exact moment, the officials finally realized the truth, promptly disqualifying the German driver. So, in a single weekend, Hans became the only driver ever to receive a did not qualify, a did not finish, and a disqualification, all for the same Grand Prix, and at his debut race as well. I'm not sure if that debut is absolutely terrible, or it just makes him a legend. Either way, he made his debut memorable for years to come. And speaking of memorable, check out this video on the most memorable shunt from every year of the past decades, because some of these are absolutely terrifying.